This front page here that talks about the 8 characteristics of effective school boards, I think is really important. The National School Boards Association has done a lot of research in terms of what makes boards effective. And so when you look down through this list, effective school boards, they commit to a vision of high expectations for student achievement, quality instruction, and they develop those goals. And I think everything that you guys do as a board, and I know this because obviously you're leaders in this community or you wouldn't be sitting here with us tonight. Every decision that you make has some impact on kids in one way or another. You know, and I would hope most boards in this state, they make decisions that are quite frankly in the best interest of kids. And so when you're looking at your role as a board, by common law, there's a couple of duties that I think are important. And one is the duty of care. Does anybody know what that is if you've been to any of our trainings? Duty of care really means that you come to school board meetings prepared to discuss and make decisions on those issues that are in front of you. In other words, you have a board packet before your meetings, you go through the board packet, and you're knowledgeable enough about the information. That doesn't mean that you go out and perform your own investigation on any particular issue, but you're informed enough through that information to come to board meetings and to make decisions. Some of you may have questions. You know, the warrants is a perfect example. I would tell you that if any of you have questions about finances or anything else in the agenda, I think that, and I'm talking about best practices here, I would hope that there are open lines of communication with all of you, both from John and to John, as well as the other administrative staff, to where if you have a question, you can come in on an informal basis and ask that question and get it answered. And I will tell you too that I've been doing this for nearly 20 years. I think also when you're asked questions, and maybe repeated questions about a particular topic, I think then that might warrant bringing that issue up in front of the board and saying, you know, we've had this question come up by a couple of people, you know, there might be others that have questions, and then just get it out there. That doesn't mean that you need to spend 3 hours approving of minutes or 3 hours discussing each and every line item in your budget. But it should provide an opportunity, once you review that packet, to note the questions that you have and visit informally with John or another administrator or even a fellow trustee before you come in to the board meeting. One of the things that I think is important in that, again, in doing this for a number of years, and Joe, you can speak up since most of you know that Joe is a retired superintendent and provides a lot of insight in terms of these issues. I think one of the things that you want to try and do at your board meetings, particularly if you're trying to build trust between people, and I would tell you that I think all of you sitting at this table have good intentions in terms of being here. I know most of you, and I think that that's true with respect to any trustee that sits on any board in Montana. If they weren't concerned about the education of the students in that community, if they weren't concerned about the delivery of education, and if they weren't viewed as a leader in the community, quite frankly, I don't think that any of you would be sitting here. And so all of you have something to bring to this table in terms of this board. Trustees, but that doesn't mean that you guys don't have access to the same type of information. Pat, you probably has more communication with John just in terms of preparation for meetings, right? Anticipating what's coming up, setting agendas, that type of thing. But in terms of substantive information, when you're talking about transparency, and transparency is a two-way street. You know, you have internal transparency, which really means that all of you inside the school system have access to the same quote-unquote public information. Private information in terms of student records and personnel records, of course, is a different story because of the rights of privacy in Montana. So you want to strive towards a culture of both internal transparency and external transparency as well. Okay? And so, and I've heard that for years. I don't think that most board chairs have more information than other people, but they communicate more closely with the administration just by virtue. And you know that, Vicki, from being board chair, just in terms of your role and being prepared for meetings. And again, it goes back to the duty of care as a trustee and as a board member and as the chairperson in terms of coming to meetings and being fully prepared and anticipating issues that might come up. The duty of loyalty is another duty of any board, quite frankly. And the duty of loyalty, does anyone know what the duty of loyalty means? And I don't mean to sit here and lecture for 2 hours. I would hope that you guys have questions. Anyone know what the duty of loyalty means? In reference to your position on this board. What it means in general is that when you are sitting here in your capacity as a trustee, your loyalty is to this district and to no one else, okay? In other words, and it goes back to what I said a few minutes ago, where every decision that you make that has an impact on kids, and most of them do in some fashion, your loyalty has to be to the school district. And I'll give you an example, and you guys may have heard this before. If I have a spouse in this school system, and let's say that they're part of a collective bargaining agreement, and I'm sitting on the board, and I am asked to ratify a collective bargaining agreement, and of course there likely will be some type of increase, there might even be an increase on the base. You have to, in thinking about should I or should I not ratify this contract. On the one hand, you might be saying, well, geez, you know, a 3 or a 5 or a 10 or a 20% raise might be real nice for my family. But when you're sitting here, and it's tough to do as a human being, you have to disregard that and you have to say, is this proposal, whatever it might be, in the best interest of the kids that we are serving? Even if it harms you individually, your loyalty is to the district, okay? And I think that that's tough for most people. Again, we're all humans and we all have conflicts, but I think that that's really important in terms of knowing what your authority and powers are as a trustee. And then the third one, which sounds kind of weird, but it's the duty of obedience, which in essence means that you establish rules, internal rules, and you agree to comply with those. And I will tell you, when you look at the duty of obedience, I think that's when you really need to look at the way that you're operating. I would sort of characterize it as, and in the strategic plan document that you have in front of here, I would characterize that as norms of governing behavior. In other words, as I said earlier, all of you come from different walks of life. All of you have different opinions. All of you bring a different value to this board. I'm sure there are times when all of you agree on certain issues that are before the board, and I'm certain that there are issues that you don't agree on. And that's really what makes boards in Montana work. Under our Constitution, you have supervision and control over everything that happens under your jurisdiction. And in large part, you're responsible for everything that happens under your jurisdiction as well. But that constitutional provision says you have, as elected trustees, you have supervision and control over, in essence, everything that occurs in the school system. And that's not really to be taken lightly. So again, you do have a lot of power and authority when you're sitting here. And I think one of the things too that's really important, and again, if I'll take myself and Joe Brott, we're always picking on each other, so I'll pick on him again tonight. So let's assume that Joe and I are both sitting on this board. And let's assume that I don't like Joe very well. I don't like him personally. I really don't like the side of him. That's not true, Joe. But you have to suspend your natural inclination, and you have to give people the benefit of the doubt. As I said earlier, everybody here has good intentions in terms of why you're here. So if Joe has something that he thinks is important to say, as much as I despise Joe, hypothetically, I have to suspend my natural inclination to jump down his throat, right? I mean, you really do. I think that, again, particularly on controversial issues, I think that you all have to develop, and if you want to tonight, we could even get into some process issues. How are we going to treat each other? How are we going to communicate with one another? How are we going to operate as an effective board, looking at these 8 characteristics that are in front of you, in terms of governing the district and making sure that whatever processes the board puts in place, that you're relying upon others to carry out the will of the board. And really, that's what you're doing when you're engaging in strategic planning. A lot of times when you go through a strategic planning process, the role of the board is to set the standard high. When we do strategic planning, and you'll remember this for those of you that were on the board the last time we came, I think we got into discussions about what the core purpose and the core values of the district are. And what that means is you plant the flag and you stand for what this district believes in. Not what I believe in as an individual trustee, or not what Joe believes in, but what does this district stand for? That's what I would characterize as your core purpose. Why is it that Florence Carlton School District exists in the first place? What makes you unique? What makes you fantastic? You know, why are you here? Why are your kids excelling? That's really a core purpose. Core values are part of that core ideology, where again, you say as a board, what's important to us in terms of our behaviors? What will we not do in terms of changing our course? And those are some things that I think, and again, you guys tell us how far you want to go with some of this tonight, but I think if this board starts working together, again, understanding that all of you have differences, and I would hope that and again, I know this because we read the papers, and it's with every school board in this state. You're going to have issues that come before the board, and you're going to have disagreements about what those issues are and the outcomes of those issues. It's just by nature. And I would tell you that in many ways, and again, I worked with boards for a long time, so is Joe. I think in many ways, if you get to a point where boards are agreeing with everything, then I would say that you're not thinking very clearly. You know, and you're not bringing all that you have as a trustee to the table. And so I think that one of the things that you can do, again, to create a level of trust, to create transparency, is to give everybody sitting at this table the benefit of the doubt, and to say, I don't care why or how you're here, but the fact of the matter is that you're here. I will respect what you say. I will not interrupt you. I won't yell at you. And I'm going to suspend my natural inclination and listen before I judge and sort. That's one of those things where you say we're going to engage in deliberations or discussion before we actually get into deliberating and sorting. And I think, too, the public, in many schools, the public sees the way that the board operates. And I think that that's really important, too, in terms of the way that all of you, and I'm not picking on any one of you because I haven't been to one of your board meetings in a long, long time, but I think, you know, the public has certain perceptions, and again, none of you would be sitting here if you weren't viewed as leaders in this community. And I think that you can take that as though, you know, as part of a mentorship, so to speak, in terms of your citizenship and your volunteering. We all know that trustees in Montana, they put an awful lot of work in, and they don't get paid monetarily. But I think most of you that have been on the board quite a while, it's fairly rewarding. It has to be, or otherwise, I don't think that you'd be sitting here. Okay? And so, Joe, do you have anything that you want to add?
You know, I'm kind of listening along with this. Just kind of a recap is, it's probably not good as a board to always sit here and be unanimous on everything you do, like Debra said. This is a place where you have an opportunity to speak how you feel and what you want. And as Debra said, everybody should give everybody else the respect that they would like to have in terms of listening, and taking it all in and then making your decision. And if your decision on that particular issue is not on the favorable side, I guess so be it, But one of the things that you have to remember is that as soon as you're done and you walk out the door, as a board, you need to be united in the decision that was made. Okay? Whether it was in your favor this time or maybe next time. And then the other thing on that is, I always think whatever you do, and every time you do something, you always have to have your students in mind. Because that's what you're doing. Right? And it's not an easy process to follow and to think about every time, but every time it's, what we're doing here, what we're discussing, what we may be arguing about, whatever it may be, are we taking the student's best interest in mind when we're doing this and coming up with our decision? That kind of all goes back to once we get into developing what our mission and vision is.
And I think what Joe just said, and what he pointed that out, it is important, and here's what I would tell you. If you feel very strongly about an issue that is coming up on an agenda, the time to advocate for that is before the board votes. That's the time to try and convince others in some fashion that your way is the way that the district should go. And I would tell you too, we've had a lot of training with our board, who happens to be a much larger board than the statewide board, 21-member board of trustees. And we have trained ourselves over a course of about 8 years now, where if we have big ticket items, again, we suspend our natural inclination to say we want to go this direction or that direction. And we use a knowledge-based decision-making process, and you'll see in these 8 characteristics, they talk about making decisions that are based upon data. And that's what the knowledge-based decision-making process requires you to do. It requires you to look at what you know about the issue that's going on now. It requires you to look at what the current realities are that are going on around you. It requires that you look at your capacity, both internally and your reputation externally. And then it requires you to consider all of the ethical implications associated with all of your choices. And if you flesh that out, what usually happens is, again, you're basing decisions on data and not based upon political persuasion or emotion or those that speak the loudest or the strongest, that you're all using that knowledge. But again, on those types of issues, even if it's a split decision, you advocate for your position before, and once the vote is taken, the majority will of the board controls. Like it or not, that's what controls in terms of the board. And there are ways that, like I said, I think that when you're advocating, and again, I think it's easy for people, and I've sat on boards too, I think it's easy for people to come to a point where you disagree with an individual one time, and then you develop maybe some hard feelings because I didn't get my way. And so if Vicki's going to bring something up, I'm going to disagree with Vicki just for the sake of disagreeing with Vicki. I think you really have to stop yourself if you get to that point and say, okay, again, I'm sitting here, I'm a reasonable person. I understand that Vicki or Colby or anybody else sitting on this board is here for good intentions. I'm going to listen, because sometimes if we just cast